10. Samuel Parsons-Salas. Maria Vera was celebrating her 25th birthday with family and friends at a Chicago nightclub in December 2022 when a confrontation broke out between several people. Someone hit Mariah during the disagreement, and one of the guests, 32-year-old Samuel Parsons-Salas, was kicked out of the club. Instead of ending the drama right then and there, the group took the argument outside. Mariah's father, Ricky Vera, approached Samuel, demanding to know who hit his daughter. Things became more heated as the men exchanged words. Samuel's girlfriend stood between them and tried to de-escalate the argument, but it was her own boyfriend who refused to listen to reason. In what can only be described as a senseless tragedy, Samuel allegedly pulled a gun and shot Ricky Vera in the head and chest. The onslaught continued from there. 26-year-old Maria Pozuelos, a family friend, was shot multiple times and fell to the curb. The shooter then approached Mariah, who was kneeling over her father's body, and shot her in the head. As Pozuelos lay dying, the gunman walked back over to him and fired 2 more bullets into his skull. Before getting into a car and fleeing the scene, the suspect shot Mariah's 24-year-old niece, Mercedes Tavares, who was hiding behind a van. He then walked up to the young woman and shot her again. Ricky Vera, Maria Pozuelos, and Mercedes Tavares died from their injuries. Mariah, on the other hand, was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, where she fought for her life, according to the most recent update from just a few days after the shooting. In a statement, Cook County prosecutor Ann McCord Rogers said that Samuel, a convicted felon with a violent history, who was on parole at the time of the massacre, destroyed his girlfriend's phone and forced her to drive him to his home at gunpoint. She attempted to escape by crashing the vehicle, but it didn't work, and he held her hostage at his apartment until the police came after him. They captured Samuel after a brief foot chase and booked him on 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and 1 count of kidnapping. Samuel allegedly admitted to the crimes during questioning and is being held without bail. His next court date is in July of 2023. 9. Malik Fisher and DeMonte Cherry. 23-year-old DeMonte Cherry went live on Instagram one day in August of 2022 to talk about friends of his who lost their lives to violence in Central Florida. During the broadcast, a 19-year-old viewer named Malik Fisher allegedly threatened Cherry and trash-talked his deceased pals. Cherry was fatally gunned down a week later outside his home in Zellwood. According to the Orange County Sheriff's Office, Malik and 2 others waited on the street in a parked vehicle until they saw Cherry driving by. When the victim saw the trio, he reportedly tried to make a U-turn and flee, but he was unable to get away before Fisher allegedly ran up to the car and shot him. Cherry fired back in self-defense, striking Malik in the leg. Malik's sister, 21-year-old Genesis Shemaiah Fisher, was subsequently shot in the face. The siblings fled the scene on foot and were picked up by a third party who drove them to the hospital. At some point, Malik dialed 911 and could be heard saying he was shot in the head. The dispatcher initially thought he was talking about his own injuries, but police later concluded that by that point in the call, he thought he'd hung up and was talking to a witness at the scene about Cherry. Genesis and Malik both survived their injuries and were charged with first-degree murder and armed robbery. According to investigators, Malik Fisher went on Instagram shortly after the shooting and posted footage of the bullet wound to his leg. In the video, he said that somebody was gonna die. Detectives believe this was a threat directed at Cherry before Malik realized he was dead. Unfortunately, the alleged actions resulting from his anger could land him on death row or behind bars for the rest of his life. 8. Adam Mann and Lisa Beverley. Like many people who experience baby mama or daddy drama, 30-year-old Lisa Beverley began voicing her frustrations on Facebook in 2009 when her ex, 29-year-old Adam Mann, failed to pay child support. However, she wasn't just harmlessly venting in her posts. She was taunting Mann with threats to report him to British Child Support Authority. Beverley made good on the threat, and the agency sent Mann a letter demanding £400 in back support and continued weekly payments of £17. Even after this small victory, Beverley continued to harass her former partner on social media. Shortly after the letter was delivered, she made a Facebook post stating, "Now who's laughing?" and "Your son hates you and so do I." She also ruthlessly smeared Mann in private conversations with her friends. It's unclear what exactly set Mann off, whether it was Beverley's vicious smack-talking, her decision to report him to child support authorities, or perhaps both. But instead of ignoring his ex and just catching up with the payments he owed, he claimed he couldn't afford the back pay. He also refused to take a DNA test to determine whether the child was actually his. In the meantime, he became consumed with rage and decided to solve his problems in the worst possible way. The antagonistic war between the former lovers ended when Beverley was found murdered in a pool of blood at her flat in London. Someone had bludgeoned her with a hammer and stabbed her to death in what was clearly a crime of passion, and authorities immediately looked to Mann as their top suspect. His new partner told detectives that he was at home when Beverley was killed, but cell phone data proved otherwise. Investigators also uncovered a computer with recently deleted files on it that had been taken from Beverley's apartment, along with other compelling evidence pointing directly at Mann as the killer. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial, but an unconvinced jury found him guilty of murder. The judge imposed a 24-year prison sentence and condemned Mann's blatant lack of remorse over the deadly measures he took to avoid his responsibilities as a father. 7. Sherry Schreiner. One night in 2017, a 42-year-old US Army veteran named Barbara Rogers dialed 911 and told the dispatcher that she had obeyed her boyfriend's instructions to hold a gun to his forehead and pull the trigger. Police arrived at the couple's apartment in Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountains to find 32-year-old Stephen Mineo dead on the floor from a gunshot wound, just as Rogers had described in the 911 call. The situation only got more bizarre from there. During questioning, Rogers explained that she and Mineo were devout members of an alien reptile cult led by a conspiracy theorist named Sherry Schreiner. Most people, including the detectives who investigated the case, had never heard of the woman. But she had more than 20,000 followers who were captivated by her radio show and YouTube ramblings about how politicians, celebrities, and other powerful people are shape-shifting lizards under the command of alien overlords. Schreiner and her followers believed that they were plotting to take over the planet and implement an authoritarian worldwide government. Schreiner described herself as a messenger of the highest God, and while it sounds laughable to the average person, she had an uncanny knack for brainwashing people who were seeking a sense of spiritual purpose. She convinced some of her followers to abandon their lives and dedicate themselves wholly to her mission. Shortly before Steve Mineo's death, Schreiner tried to convince him that Rogers was a vampire witch reptilian super soldier disguised as a human. Mineo realized Schreiner was a fraud and called her out in a series of YouTube videos, only to face vicious backlash from the cult. Just when it seemed like the couple was ready to move forward with their lives, a night of drinking somehow led to tragedy. Rogers was charged with first-degree murder, but a jury convicted her of the lesser charge of third-degree murder. She was sentenced to 15 to 40 years in prison as a result. Schreiner reportedly used Mineo's death to bolster her own agenda, selling the tragedy to her followers as a power play by corrupt people and organizations. She also used the ordeal as a great reason to donate to her campaign to save the world from evil. However, Schreiner passed away several months later from natural causes. 6. Charlie Sheen. American actor Charlie Sheen has appeared in many popular films and shows and become a household name for his part in the Emmy Award-winning series 2.5 Men. But he's arguably best known for his infinitely more fascinating personal life, which includes 3 drama-filled marriages, a life-threatening battle against addiction, and a highly public fall from grace marked by domestic violence allegations, drug-fueled rampages, disturbing Twitter rants, and other reckless and destructive behavior. During the early 2000s, amid multiple arrests and failed rehab stints, Sheen became entangled in an acrimonious divorce and child custody battle with his ex-wife, Denise Richards. In one particularly noteworthy incident that happened in 2008, Richards released a voicemail she'd received from Sheen 3 years earlier, in 2005. The message consisted of an expletive-laden rant calling her various derogatory names, including the widely despised racial slur known as the N-word. Shortly before the leak, Richards had mentioned in a TV Guide interview that she no longer planned to take the high road when it came to her dealings with Sheen, who'd only become increasingly hostile and bitter during the former couple's seemingly endless war over their 2 daughters. The voicemail leak proved that she was ready to play hardball, and it served its purpose well by further damaging Sheen's already struggling reputation. The actor apologized to the public shortly after the voicemail was released. When it comes to the use of certain words, sorry doesn't always cut it, and this situation certainly qualified as one of those instances that the public usually struggles to forgive. But his derogatory diatribe would soon be overshadowed by his continued outrageous behavior. One of Sheen's most career-damaging moves came in 2011 when he bashed 2.5 Men creator Chuck Lorre during an interview with radio host Alex Jones. In what can only be described as a typical bizarre Charlie Sheen rant, he said he embarrassed Lorre in front of his kids and described him as having an unevolved mind. By then, producers at CBS and Warner Brothers were already highly concerned about Sheen's behavior, which they'd mostly overlooked due to his acting talent and the show's popularity. But everyone has a limit, and Sheen lost his contract with the series, going from the highest paid actor on television to jobless and disgraced overnight. He appears to have gotten his life together and has approached his past with a level of honesty and remorse that's helped to mend his public image. But his years-long meltdown is still the first thing that comes to many people's minds when they hear his name, and unfortunately for him, that will likely never change. 5. Tori Emery and Danielle Booth. In the age of the internet, many rivalries begin on social media, where people seem to be a lot braver than they would be in a face-to-face confrontation. But sometimes, these battles get so heated that they spill over into the real world and end in horrifying violence. Such was the case for 23-year-old Tori Emery and 20-year-old Danielle Booth, who began a war of words online in 2010 when they found themselves competing for the affections of an inmate doing time at a Michigan State Correctional Facility. As the Facebook feud escalated, Booth began to fear for her safety and filed a police report. Just days later, Emery spotted Booth in the passenger seat of another young woman's car in the city of Pontiac. Emery chased the vehicle, ramming into it repeatedly as the driver, 21-year-old Alicia Abernathy, desperately tried to escape, with both cars reaching speeds of over 80 miles per hour. The pursuit ended in tragedy when Abernathy ran a red light and crashed into a dump truck. She died from her injuries, and Booth was rushed to hospital in critical condition. Emery, whose young child was in the car during the reckless encounter, fled the scene. But law enforcement quickly caught up with her and arrested her for murder, assault, and child abuse. During Emery's arraignment, her mother Tracy stood outside the courthouse, offering a different version of events than the one prosecutors presented in court. She claimed that the victims, Booth and Abernathy, saw Emery at a fast food restaurant that day, and that the young woman harassed her daughter and challenged her to chase them. Tracy said that Emery didn't mean to kill anyone, but that she was merely looking for a fight. These claims did little to help Emery's case. She ultimately pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and received an 18 to 60-year prison sentence. At her sentencing hearing, she apologized to Abernathy's family and expressed remorse for her actions. 4. Franklyn Williams. When Franklyn Williams wouldn't stay quiet during a sentencing hearing in Cleveland for a series of armed robberies and other crimes in 2018, Judge John Russo ordered court deputies to tape his mouth shut. Russo proceeded to sentence Williams to 24 years in prison. However, the judge was apparently put off by his own actions, so much so that he called a special hearing a week later to apologize for having Williams' mouth taped closed. During the proceeding, he pointed out that there is legal precedent for gagging a defendant to keep order in a court, but he said he was nevertheless sorry for doing so, even though Williams interrupted the proceeding more than 60 times in less than an hour. Before the apology hearing, Williams told the Fox 8i team that he was just trying to raise awarenesses to injustices by speaking out in court, although he only said freedom of speech, no duct tape repeatedly before his mouth was covered. He said that the ordeal left him feeling humiliated, and the NAACP described Judge Russo's actions as outrageous and a failure of basic human decency. The case got even more complicated when Williams told the I-Team that he'd been hit in the head and didn't even remember going to trial. He also claimed that he didn't receive any medical treatment for his injury. During his apology, Russo said that even though he imposed a 24-year sentence, he never made it official. Instead, he recused himself from the case and deferred to the state's Supreme Court to appoint another judge to make the final say on the matter. Things didn't go any better the second time around, however. The case was reassigned to Judge Patricia Cosgrove, who called Williams a narcissist and handed down an even heavier 33-year prison sentence. She said that the defendant didn't learn from his 4 previous prison stints and that his crimes only escalated over the decade leading up to his most recent conviction. 3. Jamek Blake and Kwame Dancy. Jamek Blake and Kwame Dancy grew up in Harlem together and were best friends from the age of 12 all the way into adulthood. But their bond was tested and ultimately destroyed when the pair got into a Twitter beef in 2009. The rivalry between the 22-year-olds started out with rude but seemingly harmless smack-talking back and forth. But they became increasingly angry at each other, especially as other social media users upped the ante by taking sides and joining in on the issue. Tensions eventually reached a boiling point, and Blake fatally shot Dancy on the street, bringing the feud between besties turned enemies to a tragic and shocking end. Just hours earlier, Blake had posted a tweet directed at Dancy, saying that people were looking for him. In the same post he wrote, "Don't think I won't give up your address for a price, better chill ASAP." A month earlier, the accused killer had ominously tweeted RIP Kwame. Shortly after the shooting, Blake showed up at the hospital and consoled Dancy's grief-stricken father. Prosecutors claimed that this was an attempt at a cover-up and that there was hostility between Blake and Dancy even before the Twitter feud started, when the pair publicly fought over a woman. Blake's arrest came as a shock to Dancy's mother, Madeline Smith, who thought the friendship between her son and his killer, who she treated like a second son, was strong enough to overcome their differences. She was also stunned by how a Twitter quarrel culminated into such deadly violence. Sadly, it was among the first of many fatal social media battles that have occurred throughout the world in the nearly 15 years since the shooting. Blake pleaded guilty to manslaughter and received a 21-year prison term as a result. At his sentencing, he admitted that his ego clouded his judgment and, in his words, would not allow me to back down. 2. Nathan A. White. Attorney Nathan A. White was working on a federal case as a partner with the prestigious Taylor English law firm in 2023 when he lost his cool during a courtroom exchange with opposing counsel L. Michelle Gessner. It was apparently bad enough for Gessner to file a motion seeking sanctions against White for his behavior. According to documents obtained by the American Bar Association Journal, White spoke to Gessner suddenly and without warning or provocation, very loudly and in a condescending tone. He allegedly exploded at Gessner for simply answering a question he asked, calling her an effing piece of you-know-what and a worthless human. Gessner said in her complaint that she told White he doesn't get to speak to her like that, and that he shouldn't speak to her at all if he can't be respectful. She gathered her belongings and asked a court worker if the exchange was captured on a video or audio recording, at which point White allegedly pointed his finger in her face close enough to strike her and said that he didn't care if he was recorded. According to the motion, White went on to call Gessner a worthless piece of you-know-what once again. Federal Judge Maxo Cogburn Jr. concluded that White did in fact use vulgar language against Gessner and that he approached her in an antagonistic manner. Cogburn described White's behavior as deplorable and unacceptable, and he said that his actions couldn't be justified under any circumstances. White reportedly claimed that he'd recently been hospitalized when the incident happened and that he was stressed out due to his medical issues. And while this explanation failed to spare him from Judge Cogburn's admonishing remarks, he managed to avoid sanctions as long as it didn't happen again. 1. Robert Fries. In 2018, a man from Exeter, New Hampshire named Robert Fries was arrested for writing a comment on a news website accusing Police Chief William Shoup of covering up the actions of a corrupt officer. The article was about a retiring officer who Fries clearly had issues with. In addition to the allegation against Chief Shoup, Fries described the officer as a dirty cop and accused him of misconduct. According to the state's defamation law, it's a crime to intentionally and falsely disparage another person. Consequently, Fries was slapped with a misdemeanor charge for his statement a few weeks after his comment appeared online. The criminal complaint stated that Fries purposely made a false statement that he had reason to believe would expose the target to public contempt, but not everyone agreed with that assessment. In fact, Fries' arrest caught the attention of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, which described the seemingly outdated law as a policy that criminalizes saying mean things about people. The organization even filed a federal lawsuit arguing that the defamation law violates a person's First Amendment rights. Shortly after the ACLU spoke out, the charge against Fries was dismissed. But he didn't win all of his battles against the New Hampshire legal system. After the case was dismissed, Fries sued the state's attorney general, claiming that the defamation statute is unconstitutional. His bid to overturn it ultimately lost though, and the law remains on the books today. Would you rather get sucker punched and lose a front tooth for talking smack at an archenemy, or spend 6 months in jail for punching someone who insulted you? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.